The factory floor hummed with the rhythmic clanking of metal and the occasional hiss of steam. Jack Thornton wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, glancing at the clock on the wall. 2:37 a.m. Another grueling night shift at the Clearwater Industrial Plant, where he'd spent the last 12 years of his life. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and with the rising cost of living, steady was all a man could ask for. Jack was in charge of maintenance, ensuring the massive machines that pressed and molded automobile parts stayed operational. Tonight, something was off. One of the hydraulic presses had been stuttering, the sound irregular, like it was struggling against something. He grabbed his flashlight and crouched beside the enormous machine, peering into the darkness beneath its steel body. The shadows shifted. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Something or someone was down there. He hesitated, then extended his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. That's when he saw her. A girl, no older than 10, huddled against the cold concrete floor. Her wide, terrified eyes locked onto his. Her face was smudged with grease, her blonde hair tangled and dirty. She was trembling, clutching her knees to her chest, and wearing a tattered white dress that looked out of place in the grimy industrial setting. Jack's heart pounded. How the hell did a kid end up in here? "Hey, kid," he whispered, keeping his voice calm. "You okay?" The girl didn't answer. She pressed herself further against the base of the machine, like a wounded animal bracing for a predator's attack. Jack reached into his pocket for his phone to call security, but something stopped him. Fear in the girl's eyes. It wasn't just fear of being found. It was terror. Then he noticed her hand. Her small fingers were curled against her palm, but the dim glow of his flashlight revealed something disturbing. A barcode printed on the inside of her wrist. Jack's stomach twisted. That wasn't normal. That wasn't right. A barcode? On a child? He glanced around, suddenly aware of how eerily quiet the factory had become. Something about this was very, very wrong. He had to act fast. Jack's mind raced. The barcode on the girl's hand wasn't something you'd find on a lost child. This was something out of a dystopian nightmare. His gut told him that whatever situation she was in, it was bad. Really bad. He crouched lower, extending his hand. "Listen, kid. I don't know what's going on, but you can't stay here. This place is dangerous." The girl flinched at his voice, pressing herself further into the shadows. Jack cursed under his breath. He couldn't just leave her there. If someone else found her, someone who knew she was here, he didn't want to think about what might happen. A sharp creak echoed through the factory. Jack stiffened. Footsteps. He instinctively killed his flashlight and pulled back into the shadows, listening. Heavy boots thudded against the concrete, moving in their direction. "Sector B clear," a gruff voice said. Jack's stomach nodded. "Security? No, these guys weren't from the plant." Another voice crackled over a radio. "Keep looking." She couldn't have gotten far. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. They were looking for her. The girl heard it too. Her tiny hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a whimper. Her wide eyes filled with panic. Jack made a snap decision. He turned back to her, speaking in the softest whisper he could manage. "I don't know who you are or what's going on, but we have to get out of here. Now." She hesitated, her breath shaky. But then, as the footsteps grew closer, she reached for him. Jack scooped her up, cradling her against his chest as he pressed himself behind a stack of metal crates. A flashlight beam swept over the area. "Nothing yet," one of the men muttered. Jack held his breath, willing himself to stay still. The girl's tiny body trembled against his, but she didn't make a sound. The men lingered for a few more seconds, then moved off toward the loading bay. Jack exhaled. They needed to move. He glanced toward the exit. Just past the factory's storage room was a back door leading to the alley. If he could make it there without being seen. Jack hoisted the girl onto his back. "Hold on tight," he whispered. She obeyed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he crept toward the storage room. The factory's flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows along the walls. Every step felt like a gamble. Just as he reached the door, a loud bang shattered the silence. The girl flinched. Jack spun around. One of the men had knocked over a cart. "Damn it!" he cursed, adjusting his earpiece. "Check the machines again." Jack didn't wait. He slipped into the storage room and pushed forward toward the back exit. He reached for the handle. Locked. Shit. The girl tugged at his shirt, her breathing ragged. Jack turned to her. "We'll find another way, okay?" Her eyes darted past him, and she lifted a shaking finger, pointing to a vent near the floor. Small, tight, but big enough for her. Jack dropped to one knee. "Think you can fit through?" She hesitated. More voices echoed down the hall. Jack didn't have time to be gentle. He opened the vent and helped her inside. "Crawl straight ahead. There should be another opening on the other side." She nodded, her fear battling her trust. As she disappeared into the vent, Jack pulled the grate back into place just as the door behind him burst open. The door crashed open behind Jack, sending a shockwave of adrenaline through his system. He spun around just in time to see two men storm into the storage room. These weren't factory security guards. These guys were something else. Dressed in black tactical gear, they looked more like mercenaries than hired help. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head, swept the room with a flashlight. The other, a wiry guy with a scar running down his cheek, tapped his earpiece. "She's not here," Scarface muttered. The bald guy grunted. "She has to be." The tracker's still pinging inside the factory. Tracker? Jack's stomach twisted. That meant they could follow her wherever she went. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. If they saw him standing here like this, they'd start asking questions. And Jack wasn't in the mood to answer. Scarface turned, finally noticing Jack standing by the locked door. His eyes narrowed. "You work here?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, maintenance crew." "What the hell's going on?" The bald guy stepped forward, looking him up and down. "You seen a kid running around?" Jack's heart pounded. He forced himself to look confused. "A kid? In this place?" He chuckled dryly. "Unless you're talking about rats. I think you got the wrong guy." Scarface studied him for a second too long. "You sure about that?" Jack shrugged. "I've been fixing a jammed press all night. If there's a kid, maybe they slipped out the back. You should check the alley." Bald guy grunted. "Could be." He turned back to Scarface. "Let's sweep the other side of the factory." Scarface lingered. His sharp gaze flickered toward the vent. Jack's muscles tensed. "Don't look too long, buddy." Scarface exhaled through his nose and turned away. "Let's go." As they stepped out, Jack let out a slow breath, waiting for their footsteps to fade before turning back to the vent. He tapped lightly. "You okay in there?" A small, shaky whisper answered him. "Why yeah." Jack pulled the vent cover off and reached inside. A tiny hand gripped his, and he carefully helped her out. "You were right," he whispered. "Someone is tracking you." The girl's blue eyes welled up with fear, but she didn't speak. Jack crouched to her level. "Look, I need to know what's going on. Who are they? And why do you have a barcode on your hand?" The girl bit her lip, her small body trembling. I don't know my name," she finally whispered. "They only called me Subject 11. Jack's stomach dropped. Jack stared at the girl, his mind spinning. Subject 11? That wasn't a name, that was a designation. A label. He had no idea what kind of operation he had just stepped into. But one thing was certain. This girl was in serious danger. "Okay," he whispered, keeping his voice calm. "We'll figure this out, but first we need to get out of here. Those guys aren't going to stop looking for you." She gave a small nod, but her hands were still shaking. Jack reached out, carefully taking her wrist. The barcode was crisp, printed like it had been stamped there at birth. Beneath it, a tiny sequence of numbers. X11-03-25. Jack's stomach churned. Who does this to a child? He forced himself to focus. "First things first, get out of the factory." "We'll take another route," he whispered. "Stick close to me." She clung to his arm as he cracked open the storage room door. The factory floor was still dimly lit, the massive machinery casting long shadows across the concrete. He listened, no footsteps nearby. Good. Moving swiftly, Jack led her past a row of metal shelving, toward the side entrance where deliveries were unloaded. The exit was only a few feet away when a voice echoed from the hallway. "Check the exits." She couldn't have gone far. Jack's blood ran cold. They were cutting off their escape routes. He spun around, scanning for another way out. That's when he spotted it. A ladder leading up to the catwalk above the factory floor. It wasn't an exit, but it was a way out of sight. "Change of plans," Jack muttered. He lifted the girl up first. "Climb fast. I'll be right behind you." She hesitated for only a second before gripping the rungs and pulling herself up. Jack followed, moving quickly but quietly. Just as he reached the top, the side entrance slammed open. Jack flattened himself against the catwalk, pressing the girl against his chest as they watched the two men storm in below. "They have to be here somewhere," Scarface barked. The bald guy pulled out a device that looked like a scanner. "We're close. The signal is strong." Jack's mind raced. That tracker, they're following it. His eyes flickered to the barcode on her wrist. Was the tracker inside her? The girl trembled in his arms, but Jack kept her still. If they made even the smallest noise. The bald guy frowned at the scanner, then turned toward the storage room. "I think they doubled back," Scarface cursed. "Then move. We're wasting time." The two men took off, leaving the factory floor empty once more. Jack exhaled, his heart pounding. That was too close. He turned to the girl. "Listen to me. Do you have anything in your body? An implant, anything they could be tracking?" Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head, but then she froze. Slowly, she raised her wrist and pointed at the barcode. Jack clenched his jaw. Damn it, the tracker was inside her. Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing. If the tracker was inside her, they didn't have much time. The men would keep closing in until they found her. He had to think fast. The girl sniffled, looking at him with wide, scared eyes. "Can they find me? Because of this?" She lifted her wrist, her small fingers tracing the barcode. Jack exhaled sharply. "Yeah, kid. I think so." She swallowed hard, her tiny shoulders trembling. "Then, how do we stop them?" Jack scanned the catwalk, looking for anything that might help. Then he spotted it, a small maintenance room built into the upper level. If they could get inside, he'd have a moment to think. "Come on," he whispered, taking her hand. They moved quickly across the metal platform, careful not to make noise. Jack reached the door, jiggled the handle. Unlocked. Thank God. He pulled her inside and shut the door behind them. The room was cramped, filled with old toolboxes, spare machine parts, and a flickering fluorescent light. Jack turned to the girl. "I need to check your wrist, okay?" She hesitated but slowly stretched out her arm. Jack inspected the barcode. It looked like just ink, but there had to be something underneath. He pressed lightly against the skin and felt it. A tiny, hard lump beneath the surface. Jack's stomach twisted. They put a tracking chip inside her. The girl flinched. "It hurts." Jack softened his voice. "I know, kid, but we have to get it out." She looked up at him, her lip trembling. "How?" Jack scanned the shelves, searching for anything useful. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd seen his fair share of injuries working in a factory. He needed something sharp, something sterile. His eyes landed on a small utility knife and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Not ideal, but it would have to do. He knelt beside her. "This is gonna hurt, but we have no choice. If we leave that chip in, they'll find us." The girl hesitated, then gave a small, determined nod. "Okay." Jack grabbed a rag from the shelf. "Bite down on this." She took it, her tiny hands gripping her dress as she braced herself. Jack's hands were steady, but his gut churned. He hated the idea of hurting her, but if he didn't do this now, she'd never be safe. With a deep breath, he pressed the blade against her skin. The girl let out a muffled cry, her body tensing. Jack worked quickly, making a small incision just below the barcode. Blood welled to the surface, but then, a tiny metallic chip slipped out. Jack grabbed it with his fingers, dropping it onto the floor. He snatched a nearby wrench and smashed it. The chip sparked, then went dark. The girl sobbed softly, but relief flickered in her tear-filled eyes. Jack grabbed the rubbing alcohol, dousing her wound before wrapping it with a strip of clean fabric. "You did good, kid." She wiped her tears, breathing shakily. "Will they still find us?" Jack stared at the destroyed chip. Not with that tracker gone. But they weren't safe yet. Now that the men knew she was missing, they wouldn't just give up. Jack looked at her, determination burning in his chest. "No, but we have to get out of here now." Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. Smashing the tracker had bought them some time, but not much. The men were still in the factory, and when they realized the signal had gone dead, they'd double their efforts to find the girl. She winced, cradling her bandaged wrist. "What do we do now?" Jack took a steadying breath, running through their options. They couldn't just waltz out the front door, not with those guys combing the place. But there was another way. "The loading docks," he muttered. The factory's shipping area had a series of underground tunnels used for moving large pallets between storage sections. If they could reach those tunnels, they could slip out unnoticed. Jack turned to the girl. "We need to get to the basement. Can you run?" She nodded, though she still looked shaken. "Good. Stay close." Jack cracked the maintenance room door open and listened. The factory floor was still quiet, but that wouldn't last long. He led her back onto the catwalk, moving quickly toward a rusted stairwell that led down. As they descended, Jack's gut twisted. Every shadow, every distant clatter of machinery made his instincts scream danger. He knew how this worked. Guys like those two never left loose ends. And he had just become one. They reached the basement level, a dimly lit concrete space stacked with wooden crates and metal shelving. The air was thick with dust and machine oil. Jack scanned the room. "There," he whispered, pointing to a large grated floor vent leading to the underground tunnels. But as he stepped forward, a voice boomed from above. "Stop right there." Jack spun around. The bald guy and Scarface stood at the top of the stairwell, guns drawn. The girl gasped, gripping Jack's arm. Scarface sneered. "That was a big mistake, pal." Jack clenched his jaw. His mind raced. He had to think fast. The vent was 10 feet away. If he could get the girl inside, she might have a chance to escape. But he would have to hold these guys off. Jack turned to the girl, his voice low and firm. "When I say go, you run for that vent. Crawl through and don't look back. Understand?" She trembled, but she nodded. Scarface cocked his gun. "Hands where I can see, hero." Jack lifted his arms slowly, stepping forward. All right. Let's talk." Bald guy scowled. "There's nothing to talk about. Hand over the girl." Jack lunged. He grabbed the nearest metal pipe and swung hard, knocking bald guy's gun aside. The shot rang out, sparking against the metal shelving. "Go!" Jack shouted. The girl sprinted toward the vent. Scarface fired, but Jack tackled him, sending them both crashing to the floor. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl scramble into the vent, disappearing into the darkness. Relief surged through him. She made it. But then, a fist slammed into Jack's ribs. Pain exploded in his side as bald guy wrenched him off Scarface, throwing him against a crate. Jack groaned, struggling to get up. Scarface staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. His rage burned like wildfire. "You just signed your death warrant," he snarled. Jack barely had time to react before the next punch landed, and everything went black. Pain. That was the first thing Jack felt when he regained consciousness. A deep, throbbing ache pulsed through his skull, and every breath sent a sharp stab through his ribs. He tried to move, but his wrists were bound, tied tightly behind his back. A rough cloth was stuffed into his mouth, gagging him. Slowly, his vision adjusted to the dim surroundings. He was still in the factory, but not in the basement anymore. Instead, he was in an empty storage room, cold and damp, the flickering overhead light casting eerie shadows on the walls. A chair creaked nearby. Scarface. The man sat across from Jack, gun resting lazily on his knee. His face was bruised from their earlier fight, and his expression was pure venom. "Well, well," Scarface sneered. "Our hero is awake." Jack glared at him, testing the restraints. Zip ties. Tight. But not impossible to break if he had time. Unfortunately, he didn't have time. The bald guy leaned against the wall, checking his scanner. His expression was tight with frustration. "The tracker's dead," he muttered. "We lost her." Scarface's grip on his gun tightened. "Then we're gonna find her the old-fashioned way." He turned to Jack, his grin twisting into something cruel. "You see, pal, we had a deal to make tonight. That little girl? She's worth a hell of a lot of money to the right people." Jack's stomach turned. Traffickers. That's what this was. They weren't just after the girl. They had planned to sell her. Scarface continued, tapping the barrel of his gun against his thigh. "Now, because of you, our buyer is pissed. And when I'm pissed," he leaned in closer, "I get creative." Jack's hands curled into fists. His body screamed with pain, but his mind was sharp. He needed a way out, fast. Bald guy sighed, still focused on the scanner. "Maybe we should just kill him and move on. She won't last long out there alone." Jack's blood ran cold. The girl was still out there, probably terrified and lost in the tunnels. If these guys found her first... No, he couldn't let that happen. Scarface smirked. "Tempting. But I say we have a little fun first." He pulled a knife from his jacket, flipping it between his fingers. Jack took a slow breath, his mind calculating. He had one shot. Scarface lunged forward, grabbing Jack by the collar. "I want to hear you beg, tough guy." Jack didn't hesitate. He swung his head forward, slamming it into Scarface's nose with a sickening crack. Scarface howled, stumbling backward, blood gushing from his nostrils. Bald guy cursed, reaching for his gun. Jack twisted his body, kicking the chair backward with all his strength. The impact shattered the wooden frame, sending him crashing to the floor. Ignoring the pain, he scrambled to his knees, his hands still bound. Bald guy raised his gun. Jack rolled just as the shot went off, the bullet splintering wood where he had been. Scarface was still cursing, blood pouring from his face. "Shoot him, you idiot!" Jack spotted a jagged piece of the broken chair leg on the ground. He grabbed it, twisting his wrists until the sharp edge met the zip tie binding him. Gunfire rang out again. Jack barely dodged, cutting through the plastic in one swift motion. Free. He lunged at bald guy, driving the wooden shard into his arm. The man screamed, dropping his gun. Jack snatched it midair, spun. Bang! Scarface collapsed, a bullet hole in his leg. He shrieked in pain, clutching his thigh. Jack didn't waste time. He turned to bald guy, who was still groaning on the floor. "Where were you taking her?" Jack growled, pressing the gun to the man's temple. Bald guy trembled. Screw you." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "I won't ask again." The man swallowed hard, breathing fast. There's a drop point outside the city. At the old train yard." Jack's jaw clenched. He knew the place. It was isolated, abandoned, a perfect spot for illegal deals. The girl was still in danger. Jack slammed the butt of the gun into the man's head, knocking him out cold. Then, without another glance at the screaming Scarface, Jack turned and ran. He had a little girl to save. Jack burst out of the storage room, gun still gripped tightly in his hand. His heart pounded as he sprinted through the dimly lit corridors of the factory. The girl was still out there, alone. He had to find her before the others did. Jack's boots pounded against the concrete floor as he made his way back toward the basement tunnels. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old machine oil. He stopped at the grated vent where she had crawled in earlier. The metal grate was still loose. She definitely went this way. Jack crouched down, peering into the darkness beyond. The tunnel stretched into blackness, barely wide enough for a grown man to fit through. With a deep breath, he pulled himself inside. The metal walls felt cold and damp, and the space was cramped. Jack had to move forward on his elbows, the sharp edges of the vent digging into his arms. The only sound was his own breathing and the distant hum of the factory. Then, a rustling sound. Jack froze. Something was moving up ahead. His muscles tensed. "Kid?" he whispered. Silence. Jack inched forward, gripping the gun. The tunnel took a sharp turn, and as he rounded the bend, a pair of wide, terrified eyes stared back at him. The girl. She was curled up in a tight ball, pressed against the tunnel wall. Her small frame was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. Jack exhaled in relief. "Hey kid, it's me." She blinked, her body still shaking. They were shooting," she whispered. "I heard the gunshots." Jack nodded grimly. "Yeah, but we don't have time to talk about that now. We need to get out of here." She hesitated, her fingers clutching the fabric of her dress. Are they coming?" Jack glanced back down the tunnel. He didn't know if more of those guys were in the factory, but he couldn't take the risk. "Not if we move fast," he said. "Come on." The girl swallowed hard but nodded. Jack turned, leading the way deeper into the tunnel system. They crawled for what felt like forever, the air growing more stale with every inch forward. Then, a metal grate appeared ahead, leading into another room. Jack pressed his ear against it, listening. Silence. He carefully pushed against the grate. It popped free with a soft clang, and Jack slipped out, pulling the girl after him. They were in a storage garage, the massive door leading outside slightly open. The cool night air drifted in, mixed with the distant sound of traffic. Jack's pulse quickened. They were almost out. But just as he took a step toward the exit, a voice rang out behind them. "Don't move." Jack spun, gun raised. 3 men stood in the doorway, weapons drawn. The girl let out a frightened gasp, gripping Jack's arm. The leader, a tall man in a black coat, smirked. "You really thought you could just walk out of here?" Jack's mind raced. 3 guns. 1 of him, and a kid to protect. This was bad. Really bad. Jack's grip on the gun tightened. 3 against 1. The odds weren't in his favor, but he'd been in tight spots before. The girl's small fingers clung to his arm, her breathing shallow. He could feel her terror. The man in the black coat, the leader, took a slow step forward. His calm, confident smirk sent a chill down Jack's spine. "Look, buddy, I get it. You want to play hero. But let's be real. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and dragging around a liability." Jack's jaw clenched. He kept his gun aimed, but his mind was racing. Think. The 2 other men spread out, flanking Jack from both sides, trying to box him in. Black coat side. "How about this? We let you walk out of here alive and you leave the girl with us. No hard feelings." Jack let out a slow breath. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. They weren't expecting him to fight, which meant he still had the element of surprise. But he had to time it perfectly. Jack's eyes flicked to the overhead shelf behind the men, stacked with metal canisters just waiting for the right nudge. He didn't hesitate. Bang! Jack fired at the shelf support beam. The bullet ripped through the rusted metal, and in an instant, the canisters came crashing down. The men barely had time to react before several hundred pounds of steel came toppling onto them. Jack didn't wait to see the damage. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing the girl's wrist. She stumbled forward, and they bolted for the open garage door. Behind them, the men cursed, struggling to dig themselves out. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking against the concrete. Jack yanked the girl down, keeping low and fast. His muscles screamed, but adrenaline kept him moving. They burst outside into the open air. Jack's eyes darted around. They needed a ride. Now, his gaze locked onto a parked delivery van idling near the loading dock. He didn't think, he acted. Jack sprinted toward it, the girl struggling to keep up. A worker stood by the driver's side, clipboard in hand, looking confused. Jack didn't slow down. "Sorry, pal," he grunted, before throwing a hard right hook. The worker crumpled with a groan. Jack caught him before he hit the ground, laying him down gently. Nothing personal. Then he yanked open the driver's door, shoving the girl inside. He jumped in after her, slamming the door shut. Behind them, the 3 men burst out of the factory, guns raised. "Go!" the girl cried. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He jammed the keys into the ignition and slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched, smoke curling up as the van peeled away from the loading dock. Bullets whizzed past, punching into the van's metal frame, but they were gone, out of danger, for now. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he sped through the industrial district, weaving between dimly lit streets. His heart was still hammering from the gunfight. The girl sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself, her breathing shallow. She was terrified. Jack took a quick glance at her. "You okay, kid?" She nodded, but her wide eyes told a different story. Jack exhaled and focused on the road. "We bought ourselves some time, but those guys won't stop. You know that, right?" She hesitated, then nodded again. Jack needed answers. Who were they? And why do they want you so bad? The girl swallowed hard. She glanced at her hand, rubbing at the barcode like she wanted it gone. Jack caught the movement. That mark. It means something, doesn't it? She hesitated. It's not just a barcode. Jack frowned. What do you mean? She pulled her sleeve up, revealing something he hadn't noticed before. Numbers. A series of numbers and letters inked into her skin beneath the barcode. Jack's gut twisted. This wasn't just tracking. This was identification. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "I wasn't born like other kids." Jack's pulse spiked. "What?" She clenched her fists. "I was made." Jack nearly slammed on the brakes. "Made?" he repeated. She nodded, her lips trembling. "I'm not like other people. She swallowed. "I escaped from a place. A lab. And now they want me back." Jack sucked in a sharp breath. A lab? This was bigger than he thought. But before he could process it, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A black SUV, closing in fast. Jack's grip tightened. "Damn it!" The girl turned pale. "It's them." The SUV's engine roared, tires squealing as it sped toward them. Jack floored the gas. The delivery van lurched forward, engine groaning as it picked up speed. But the SUV was faster. Jack swerved onto a narrow side street, trying to lose them. The SUV followed. "Hold on, kid," Jack growled. The girl clutched the seat. "They're gonna catch us." Jack's eyes darted ahead. A sharp left turn was coming up. "Not if I can help it." He jerked the wheel, sending the van skidding into the turn. Tires screeched. The van barely held the road, nearly tipping, but it made it. The SUV overshot the turn, its tires hitting loose gravel. It spun out, slamming into a pile of metal trash bins. Jack let out a breath. "That bought us some time." The girl stared at him, eyes wide. "That was insane." Jack smirked. "You get used to it." But his relief was short-lived. He had no idea where to go next. And worse, he knew this wasn't over. Jack kept his foot pressed on the gas, steering the delivery van through the dimly lit streets. The industrial district was behind them, but he knew they weren't safe yet. The girl sat in rigid silence, staring at the barcode on her hand. The way she traced her fingers over it made Jack's stomach churn. A human experiment. A manufactured child. Jack had seen a lot of messed up things in his life, but this was next level. He needed answers. Jack exhaled, keeping his eyes on the road. "All right, kid. Start from the beginning. What kind of lab are we talking about?" She hesitated. "It was called Project Genesis." Jack's gut twisted. That name. He'd heard it before. A long time ago. The girl continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They made me, and others. We weren't born. We were..." She swallowed. "Built." Jack frowned. "Built?" She nodded, clenching her small fists. "They called us prototypes. Engineered from the best DNA they could find. We were supposed to be perfect." Jack's blood ran cold. He had heard of this. A military black project, rumored to be testing bioenhanced humans. The kind of thing that was officially denied but always existed in the shadows. He'd thought it was just a myth. But here she was, living proof. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. "And why'd you run?" The girl flinched, as if the memories physically hurt her. Because we weren't people to them. We were property. Jack's jaw clenched. Of course, it wasn't about science. It was about control. Jack stole a glance at her. She was just a kid. No child should have to run for their life. The van rumbled onto a highway, the city's lights glowing faintly in the distance. Jack had a choice to make. He could walk away, leave this mess behind. Or he could fight. Jack already knew the answer. With a sigh, he muttered, "Guess I'm in this now." The girl looked at him, eyes hopeful for the first time. "You'll help me?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, kid. I'll help you." But in the back of his mind, one thought burned. If Project Genesis was real, then the people after her wouldn't stop. And Jack might have just made himself their next target. Jack drove in silence, his mind racing. Project Genesis. He had heard whispers about it in his past life, the kind of black ops work that went way beyond classified. And now he was in the middle of it. The girl, this prototype, sat beside him, hugging her knees. She was trying to be brave, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. "Kid," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "What's your name?" She hesitated. I don't have one." Jack frowned. "What do they call you?" She looked down at her arm, tracing the barcode. G17. Jack exhaled sharply. Not even a name. Just a number. "Well, that's not gonna work," he muttered. "We need to call you something." She looked at him, confused. Jack thought for a second. "How about Evie?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she had never considered having a real name before. She whispered it to herself. "Evie." Jack nodded. "Yeah, Evie. Sounds better than G17, don't you think?" For the first time, she almost smiled. "Yeah." But whatever peace they had was short-lived. Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Headlights, approaching fast. He felt his stomach drop. Black SUV. "Damn it," he muttered. Evie turned, her body tensing. "It's them." Jack's fingers curled around the steering wheel. They'd found them. The SUV sped up, closing the distance. The city lights were still miles away, no cops, no people. Just open highway. Jack had one option. Fight or die. He gritted his teeth. "Hold on, kid." The SUV rammed into the back of the van. The entire vehicle lurched forward, tires screeching. Evie gasped, grabbing the dashboard. Jack growled. "All right, you want to play rough." He yanked the wheel hard, swerving into the other lane. The SUV tried to match his movements, but Jack wasn't done. He slammed on the brakes. The van jerked backward, and the SUV shot forward past them. For a split second, Jack saw the driver's face, cold, focused, dangerous. Then Jack hit the gas, ramming into their back bumper. The SUV spun out, tires skidding across the highway. Then it flipped. Jack barely swerved out of the way as the SUV barrel rolled across the pavement, slamming into a ditch. The van screeched to a stop. Jack's heart pounded. He turned to Evie. "You okay?" She nodded, breathless. Jack grabbed his gun and threw the door open. He had to make sure they were really down. The SUV was crushed, steam hissing from the hood. Jack stepped forward, gun raised. He could see movement inside. A man crawled out, blood dripping from his forehead. Jack recognized him. It was Black Coat, the leader of the men from the factory. Even beaten and bloody, the man grinned. "You really think you can stop this?" he rasped. Jack narrowed his eyes. "I just did." Black Coat laughed weakly. "No, you don't get it." He coughed, blood staining his teeth. "They won't stop. They'll send more. And when they find you, you'll wish you died here." Jack clenched his jaw. He wanted to end this now. But then, Evie grabbed his sleeve. "Jack, we need to go." Jack looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes. She was right. Killing this guy wouldn't stop what was coming. Without another word, Jack turned, running back to the van. As he sped away, Black Coat's chilling words echoed in his mind. They won't stop. And Jack knew this was just the beginning. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. The van's engine roared as he pushed it hard down the highway, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and the wrecked SUV. But Blackcoat's words still echoed in his head. They won't stop. Jack had been in dangerous situations before. He'd tangled with the wrong people, made enemies who wanted him dead. But this was bigger than anything he'd ever faced. He glanced at Evie, no, not Evie, G17, or whatever the hell she really was. She was staring out the window, arms wrapped around herself, looking small and fragile. But Jack knew better now. She wasn't just some lost kid. She was something else entirely. "Hey, kid," he muttered, breaking the silence. "Tell me everything. No more half-truths." Evie hesitated, hugging her knees to her chest. Jack pressed on. "You weren't just made, were you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "They were training you for something." She swallowed hard. "Yes." Jack exhaled sharply. He'd suspected it. "For what?" Evie was quiet for a long moment. Then, "They wanted to make us better." Jack frowned. "Better how?" She bit her lip. "Faster, stronger, smarter." She hesitated, then added, "More obedient." Jack clenched his jaw. Obedient. They weren't just making soldiers, he realized. They were making weapons. Evie flinched but didn't deny it. Jack muttered a curse. "How many of you were there?" She hesitated again. "A lot at first, but only a few of us survived the training." Jack's stomach turned. He didn't need details. He'd seen what kind of training programs left only a few survivors. "What happened to the others?" he asked. Evie looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "They called it weeding out the weak." Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. These people weren't scientists. They were butchers. "Is that why you ran?" he asked. Evie nodded. I started remembering things. Things I wasn't supposed to. Feelings I wasn't supposed to have." She looked at him, eyes pleading for understanding. "I didn't want to be what they made me." Jack's heart clenched. She wasn't just some lab experiment. She was a kid who had been given no choice in what she was meant to be. Jack exhaled. "You made the right call." Evie blinked at him, as if she hadn't expected to hear that. "But those guys back there?" Jack continued. "They weren't just trying to bring you back, were they?" Evie's face darkened. She shook her head. "They weren't bringing me back." Her voice was hollow. "They were going to erase me." Jack's stomach dropped. "What?" Evie hugged herself. "I broke out. I know things. They can't let me exist." She hesitated, then added, "And if they can't have me, they'd rather destroy me." Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. He'd already known this was bad. But this changed everything. They weren't just after Evie. They were going to wipe her off the face of the earth. And if Jack got in the way, he was as good as dead too. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark, with only the distant city lights on the horizon. Then Evie asked, "Jack, where are we going?" Jack let out a slow breath. There was only one place they could go now. Somewhere we can disappear. But in the back of his mind, he knew there was no disappearing from people like this. The van rumbled along the empty highway, heading toward the city's distant glow. Jack knew they had no more than a few hours before the next wave of pursuers came looking. Blackcoat was down, but if what he said was true, more were coming. Evie sat quietly, her fingers tracing the barcode on her hand like it was a brand she couldn't erase. Jack could see it in her face. She was trying to process everything. He had to get them off the grid. But that wasn't going to be easy. Jack glanced at the gas gauge. Less than a quarter tank. Damn it. They needed fuel, food, and a solid plan. He made a decision. "We're stopping soon. Need to switch vehicles, get supplies." Evie turned to him, concern flickering in her eyes. "Is that safe?" Jack let out a dry chuckle. "Kid, nothing about this is safe." She didn't argue. A stop at nowhere. 30 minutes later, Jack pulled into a rundown gas station just off the highway. The kind of place with flickering neon lights, a half-broken vending machine, and an attendant who didn't ask questions. Jack shut off the van's engine and turned to Evie. "Stay here. Keep your head down." She nodded, sinking into her seat. Jack stepped out, the cold night air hitting him as he scanned the area. No cars. No security cameras. Good. Inside, the place smelled like old coffee and gasoline. The cashier, a scruffy man in his 50s, barely looked up from his newspaper. Jack grabbed a burner phone, a couple of energy bars, a map, and a baseball cap for Evie. Then he slipped into the bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. He looked like hell. His face was lined with exhaustion, his hands still trembling from the fight. But there was no time for self-pity. He had to keep moving. Jack pulled out the burner phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The line rang once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" Jack smirked. "It's me, Mikey." A long pause, then a sigh. Well, thought you were dead." "Not yet," Jack muttered. "But I will be soon if you don't help me out." Mikey was silent for a beat. "What kind of trouble?" "The worst kind," Jack admitted. "Need a place to lay low. Need a new ride." Mikey cursed under his breath. "You always bring the fun, don't you?" Jack smirked. "One of my many talents." Another pause. Then, "Meet me at the old rail yard on 5th and Lincoln in 2 hours, Mikey said. "I'll have something for you." Jack exhaled in relief. "I owe you one." "Damn right you do," Mikey muttered before hanging up. Jack pocketed the phone, his mind already racing through next steps. Jack stepped out of the bathroom, heading back toward the van, and froze. A black SUV had just pulled into the lot. Jack's pulse spiked. They found us. He moved fast, ducking behind a stack of tires, watching. The SUV's engine idled for a moment before the driver's side door opened. A man in a black suit stepped out. Not black coat, someone else. Another one of them. Jack clenched his jaw. They were already here, which meant Evie was in danger. Jack didn't have time to think. He had to act. Taking a slow breath, he reached for the gun at his waist. This was about to get messy. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched the black-suited man step out of the SUV. The guy was tall, built like a linebacker, and moved with the precision of someone who knew how to kill. Jack had seen his type before. Government-trained. No nonsense. The kind of operative who didn't flinch when pulling a trigger. And now, he was scanning the gas station, looking for something. Or someone. Jack. Evie. Jack ducked lower behind the tires, his mind racing. How the hell had they found them so fast? He glanced toward the van. Evie was still inside, head down, just like he told her. Good girl. But it wouldn't matter if this guy checked the vehicles. Jack had seconds to decide. A quick distraction. His eyes darted to the gas pumps. Perfect. Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out a quarter, and flicked it toward the pumps. The tiny clink echoed in the quiet night. The agent spun toward the sound, hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his side. Jack moved. Fast. He sprinted low and silent toward the van, slipping into the driver's seat before the agent could react. "Evie," he hissed. "Get down." She obeyed immediately, curling up near the floorboard. Jack fired up the engine, slamming the gas. The van lurched forward just as the agent turned back, eyes going wide. Jack didn't slow down. The agent dove to the side just as the van roared past him, missing him by inches. Gunfire erupted, 3 sharp pops, as bullets tore through the back of the van. "Hold on," Jack barked, gripping the wheel as he swerved onto the highway, tires screeching. Evie let out a small gasp but didn't scream. Jack checked the mirrors. The SUV was already in motion, peeling out of the gas station, coming after them. Damn it. They had less than 2 hours before Mikey would be ready. But now, they'd be lucky if they had 2 minutes. Jack gritted his teeth. Time to lose these bastards. The chase begins. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty, except for the blazing headlights now tailing them. The SUV was faster, better built for a chase. But Jack knew something these guys didn't. This road like the back of his hand. He took a sharp right, tires screeching as the van fishtailed onto a narrow side road. The SUV followed instantly. Jack gunned it, weaving through the dark back roads. Trees blurred past. He took another hard turn, No headlights, no signs, no civilization. Just endless backroads and pitch-black night. Are they still behind us? Evie asked, peeking up. Jack checked the mirror. The SUV was still there. Gaining. He cursed. They weren't just chasing him. They were hurting him. Jack's mind worked fast. If he didn't do something now, they'd box him in. And he knew exactly what happened to people who got boxed in. Hang on, he muttered. Evie gripped the seat as Jack yanked the wheel, sending the van careening onto a gravel road leading into the woods. The SUV followed, kicking up dust and debris. Jack smirked. They just made a mistake. These guys were trained killers, but they weren't from around here, and Jack was. The trap. Jack slammed the brakes, killing the van's lights just as they passed a fork in the road. The SUV barreled past them, headlights sweeping the wrong path. Jack didn't hesitate. He threw the van into reverse, backing up down the left fork in total darkness. The SUV kept going for 3 seconds too long. Then, the driver must have realized. Red taillights flared as the SUV skidded to a stop. But it was too late. Jack floored it, twisting the wheel, sending the van back onto the main road. By the time the SUV turned around, they were already gone. Jack let out a slow breath. That bought them time. But not much. Evie looked up at him. Did we lose them? Jack glanced at the mirror. No lights, no movement. For now, he said. But they'll find us again. And next time, they won't come alone. Evie's face was unreadable, but Jack could tell she understood. There was no running from this. No hiding. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to fight. Jack smirked. They just made a mistake. These guys were trained killers, but they weren't from around here, and Jack was. The trap. Jack slammed the brakes, killing the van's lights just as they passed a fork in the road. The SUV barreled past them, headlights sweeping the wrong path. Jack didn't hesitate. He threw the van into reverse, backing up down the left fork in total darkness. The SUV kept going for 3 seconds too long. Then, the driver must have realized. Red taillights flared as the SUV skidded to a stop. But it was too late. Jack floored it, twisting the wheel, sending the van back onto the main road. By the time the SUV turned around, they were already gone. Jack let out a slow breath. That bought them time. But not much. Evie looked up at him. Did we lose them? Jack glanced at the mirror. No lights, no movement. For now, he said. But they'll find us again. And next time, they won't come alone. Evie's face was unreadable, but Jack could tell she understood. There was no running from this. No hiding. If they wanted to survive, they'd have to fight. Jack drove in silence, the distant city lights flickering on the horizon. His mind was spinning, calculating their next move. They weren't safe, not yet. Evie sat quietly beside him, staring at the barcode on her hand. Her fingers traced over it like she was trying to erase it. Jack finally broke the silence. We have a meeting. Evie looked up. With who? An old friend. She didn't ask questions, just nodded. Jack could tell she was still processing everything. Being hunted, her past, what that barcode meant. But there was no time to unpack it all. They needed to get to Mikey, and fast. The rail yard rendezvous. Jack pulled the van into the abandoned rail yard on 5th and Lincoln. The place was a ghost town. Rusting train cars, broken fences, shattered glass littering the ground. Mikey wasn't here yet. Jack killed the engine and turned to Evie. Stay put. Keep your head down. Evie frowned. You keep telling me that. Because it keeps you alive. She looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Jack stepped out, scanning the area. Too quiet. Then a soft crunch of gravel. Jack's hand went to his gun. Easy, cowboy, a voice called out. Jack exhaled. Mikey. A man emerged from the shadows. Scruffy beard, leather jacket, eyes that had seen too much. Mikey. Jack smirked. Still ugly as ever. Mikey grinned. And you still look like hell. They shook hands. Tell me you brought what I need, Jack said. Mikey jerked his thumb toward an old blue pickup truck parked nearby. Fresh plates, full tank, untraceable. Jack relaxed a little. Then Mikey's eyes flicked to the van. That the package? Jack tensed. She's a kid, not a package. Mikey shrugged. All I know is, people are willing to kill to get her back. So I gotta ask, what the hell are you mixed up in? Jack hesitated. It's complicated. Mikey snorted. It's always complicated with you. Jack didn't argue. Instead, he opened the van door. Evie, come on. She stepped out cautiously, eyeing Mikey like he was another threat. Mikey gave a low whistle. Damn, she's just a kid. Jack shot him a look. Told you. Mikey ran a hand through his hair. All right, here's the deal, this truck'll get you out of town, but you need to figure out your next step. You can't outrun these guys forever. Jack nodded. I know. Mikey hesitated, then sighed. Look, I don't want to get involved in your mess, but I got a guy, someone who might have answers. Jack narrowed his eyes. Answers about what? Mikey glanced at Evie. That barcode, he said. Evie's breath hitched. Jack frowned. Who is he? Mikey hesitated. A hacker. Calls himself Cypher. If anyone can crack the code on her hand, it's him. Jack exhaled. It was a risk bringing another person into this. But they needed answers. Where do we find him? Mikey pulled out a piece of paper, scribbled something down, and handed it over. Jack read it. Warehouse 17. East Side. Midnight. Jack nodded. Appreciate it. Mikey sighed. Yeah. Just don't bring trouble back to my doorstep. Jack smirked. No promises. The past catches up. They switched vehicles, leaving the van behind as Jack and Evie climbed into the pickup. As Jack pulled out of the rail yard, he glanced at Evie. She was staring at the note in his hand, deep in thought. You all right? He asked. She hesitated, then said, What if I don't want to know? Jack blinked. What do you mean? What if? She bit her lip. What if the truth is worse than what I already know? Jack exhaled. Damn, she was smart. Then we deal with it, he said. Together. She nodded slowly. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever was waiting for them at Warehouse 17, it was going to change everything. The old blue pickup truck rumbled down the darkened streets of the East Side, the city's underbelly where rules didn't apply and danger lurked in every shadow. Jack knew these streets well, too well. Evie sat quietly beside him, her fingers still absent-mindedly tracing the barcode on her hand. Jack could tell she was nervous. Hell, so was he. Cypher was not the kind of guy you casually visited. He was a ghost in the system, a man who thrived in the digital underworld. If anyone could tell them what the barcode meant, it was him. But there was always a price. And Jack wasn't sure if it was one he could afford to pay. The warehouse. They pulled up to Warehouse 17, a decrepit, graffiti-covered structure sitting at the edge of the industrial district. The metal roll-up door was shut tight, no signs of life. Jack killed the engine. This the place? Evie whispered. Jack nodded. Yeah. Stay close. They climbed out of the truck and approached the side door. Jack rapped his knuckles against it in a deliberate rhythm. Knock. Knock knock. Knock. A few seconds passed. Then a mechanical click. The door cracked open just enough to reveal a bloodshot pair of eyes behind thick glasses. Password. The man grumbled. Jack smirked. Open the damn door, Cypher. The door swung open. Standing there was a lanky man in his late 30s, wearing an oversized hoodie and sweatpants that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His place smelled like burnt electronics and stale coffee. Cypher let them in and immediately locked the door behind them. This better be worth my time, Jack, he muttered, leading them through a cluttered maze of monitors, cables, and hard drives. The walls were covered in conspiracy maps, police radio frequencies, and lines of encrypted code running on multiple screens. Jack gave a half smile. Still paranoid, huh? Cypher scoffed. Paranoia keeps me alive. He finally turned, eyeing Evie for the first time. His gaze flicked to her wrist. That it? He asked, pointing at the barcode. Jack nodded. Cypher rubbed his hands together. All right, let's see what we got. Decoding the barcode. Evie hesitated. then slowly extended her arm. Cypher leaned in, pulling a small handheld scanner from his desk. The second it passed over her skin, a soft beep echoed through the room. A series of numbers and letters flashed across one of Cypher's monitors. Then his smirk disappeared. The color drained from his face as he stared at the screen. Jack stepped forward. What is it? Cypher muttered something under his breath. Then he spun around, eyes wide with fear. You need to leave. Now. Jack frowned. Not until you tell us what's going on. Cypher was already unplugging hard drives, shutting down monitors. You don't get it, man. This is bad. He turned to Evie. Who the hell are you? Evie flinched, confused. I don't know. Cypher cursed. This isn't just some random barcode, Jack. This is a biometric encryption code used by the highest levels of black-budget government programs. Jack's stomach tightened. Cypher pulled up a classified database, one Jack had no idea how he even had access to. Lines of text scrolled across the screen. Then, a name appeared. Jack read it. Project Genesis. What the hell is Project Genesis? Jack asked. Cypher turned to him, his expression grave. It's a program that was shut down 20 years ago. Jack's pulse quickened. Then why does she have a barcode from it? Cypher's fingers flew over the keyboard, searching deeper. His face darkened. Because she wasn't supposed to exist. The truth begins to unravel. Jack's chest tightened as Cypher kept scrolling. Every document was redacted, blacked out text, classified memos. But then he found something. A single document. One file not entirely erased. He opened it. Jack and Evie leaned in. There, buried in government logs, was a sentence that sent a cold chill down Jack's spine. Subject number 19 confirmed active. Reintegration imminent. Jack looked at Evie. Her hands were shaking. Cypher shook his head. Jack, this means someone, some agency, is trying to bring her back into the program. Jack's gut twisted. Evie wasn't just a runaway. She was the last living piece of a buried secret. And whoever was hunting her wouldn't stop until they had her. Jack's mind raced. Project Genesis. A black-budget program. A girl who wasn't supposed to exist. Reintegration imminent. Cypher turned to him, face pale. You don't get it, Jack. This isn't just a cover-up. It's an active operation. They're moving. Right now. Jack clenched his jaw. Who are they? Cypher hesitated. You ever heard of the Directorate? Jack froze. Yeah. He'd heard of them. The Directorate wasn't just some government agency. It was deeper. A group that operated outside the law, outside any official records. They were ghosts. And if they wanted Evie back, they wouldn't stop until she was either taken or dead. Evie's memories surfaced. Evie was shaking. Her breathing was uneven, like she was on the edge of a panic attack. Jack crouched down beside her. Evie, hey, look at me. Her wide eyes met his. You're safe, he said firmly. She swallowed hard. I think I remember something. Cypher and Jack exchanged a look. Go on, Jack urged. Evie closed her eyes, concentrating. There were people in white coats, and a room all metal, bright lights. Her fingers curled into fists. And a voice. A woman. She used to tell me I was special. Jack's stomach tightened. Special how? Evie's breathing hitched. She said I was the last prototype that worked. Cypher cursed under his breath. Jack ran a hand down his face. Damn it. They weren't just chasing a runaway. Evie was an experiment. And the Directorate wanted her back. The alert. Suddenly, Cypher's monitors flashed red. Jack turned. What the hell is that? Cypher's fingers flew over his keyboard. Oh man. Oh man. What? Jack demanded. Cypher's eyes darted up to him. They found us. Jack's pulse spiked. How? Cypher pointed at a hacked satellite feed showing infrared heat signatures. 3 black SUVs. Inbound. Jack grabbed Evie's hand. We're leaving. Now. Cypher stood up. You don't get it, man. If they traced me here, I'm already dead. Jack shook his head. No. We move. Together. Cypher hesitated. Then glass shattered. A drone flew in, its red scanner flickering over them. Jack didn't hesitate. Boom! He shot it out of the air. Cypher cursed. That's it. They're here. Jack grabbed Cypher by the collar. Move! Cypher snatched a hard drive from his desk and stuffed it into his hoodie. Then gunfire. Bullets ripped through the warehouse walls. Jack shielded Evie, dragging her toward the back exit. Cypher pulled out a remote detonator. Jack's eyes widened. What the hell are you doing? Cypher grinned. Burning it all down. He clicked the switch. Boom! The whole damn warehouse exploded. Flames erupted behind them as they bolted toward the truck. Jack threw Evie into the passenger seat. Cypher barely making it into the back before. Tires screeched. The first SUV slammed onto the road behind them. Jack floored it. We're not gonna make it, Cypher shouted. Jack gritted his teeth. Watch me. He swerved hard, cutting through an abandoned construction site. The SUVs followed. Evie clung to her seat, eyes wide. Cypher was losing his mind in the back. Jack, you do realize these guys don't just arrest people, right? They make them disappear. Jack didn't respond. His focus was on the bridge ahead. It was half-built. A drop-off loomed at the end. Cypher's eyes widened. Oh, hell no. Jack hit the gas. The truck launched off the edge. For a second, pure weightlessness. Then, crash. They slammed onto the next platform. The SUVs didn't make it. They plummeted into the pit below, exploding on impact. A moment of silence. Jack's hands shook on the wheel. Evie sat beside him, silent. Cypher, in the back, muttered, I think I just peed myself. Jack exhaled. But they weren't safe yet. Because now, the directorate knew exactly who they were. And next time, they wouldn't send just an extraction team. They'd send killers. The truck barreled down the dark highway, the city lights fading into the distance. Jack's grip on the wheel was tight, his knuckles white. They had barely made it out. Evie was silent, staring at her barcode-marked hand, her fingers tracing the ink like it held the answers she desperately needed. Cypher sat slumped in the back, rubbing his temples. Nobody's ever escaped the directorate before, Cypher muttered. Nobody. You don't run from these guys. Jack shot him a glare through the rearview mirror. We just did. Cypher shook his head. Yeah, and that just made us priority targets. Jack didn't need reminding. His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. The explosion had slowed them down, but the directorate wouldn't stop. They were coming, and they'd bring killers this time. The safe house. Jack pulled off the main road, taking an unmarked dirt path deep into the woods. They drove in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Finally, they reached a small cabin, hidden between towering pine trees. Jack killed the engine. We lay low here, just for tonight. Cypher scoffed. And tomorrow? What, we wake up and pretend a secret government death squad isn't looking for us? Jack ignored him and turned to Evie. She looked exhausted, terrified. Come on, he said gently. Let's get inside. The three of them made their way into the cabin. It was small, just one room, a couch, and a dusty old table. Jack checked the perimeter, ensuring no unwanted surprises awaited them. Cypher sat down and pulled out his laptop. We need to figure out our next move. Fast. Jack nodded and turned to Evie. How much do you remember now? She hesitated. Then, she closed her eyes. I remember being tested, she whispered. Jack exchanged a look with Cypher. Tested how? Evie's breathing quickened. I don't know, but I remember pain. Jack's jaw tightened. Project Genesis wasn't just an experiment. It was something worse. Much worse. Cypher tapped furiously on his keyboard. I'm trying to break into old directorate logs, but it's like trying to hack into the Pentagon. Jack paced. Keep at it. He turned to Evie. You need rest. Evie shook her head. I won't sleep. Jack sighed. Try. Evie curled up on the couch, wrapping her arms around herself. Jack could tell she was scared, but she didn't say it. She didn't have to. The warning. Cypher's laptop suddenly let out a shrill beep. Jack turned. What? Cypher's face went pale. Oh, we are so dead. Jack's stomach dropped. What did you find? Cypher gulped. I was scanning directorate communication lines and, yeah, we have a problem. Jack leaned over Cypher's shoulder. Lines of encrypted messages scrolled across the screen. Then he saw it. A kill order. Jack read the words, his blood turning to ice. Terminate subject 19 on site. Neutralize all assets. Orders. Priority black. They weren't trying to capture Evie anymore. They were coming to kill her. Cypher's voice was a whisper. They sent him. Jack's head snapped up. Who? Cypher swallowed hard. Ever hear of the name Vincent Kane? Jack froze. The name sent a cold shiver down his spine. Vincent Kane was a ghost. An elite operative. A man whispered about in the darkest corners of military black ops. Where Kane went, bodies followed. Cypher looked at Jack, his face grim. We don't have hours. We have minutes. Jack turned to Evie. We have to move. Now. Evie's eyes widened. But where? Boom. The front door exploded. Jack barely had time to react before a black-clad figure stepped through the smoke. A man. Broad shoulders. A scar running across his jaw. As like ice. Jack knew that face. Vincent Kane. And he had come to end them all. Jack barely had time to react before Kane moved. Fast. A blur of black tactical gear, silent, precise, deadly. Jack lunged, shoving Evie behind him. Crack. Kane's fist slammed into Jack's ribs. Pain exploded in his side, but Jack twisted, countering with a vicious hook to Kane's jaw. Kane didn't even flinch. He grabbed Jack's arm and flipped him over the table, sending splinters flying. Cypher scrambled backward, panicking. Oh, we are so screwed. Kane drew a silenced pistol. Evie screamed. Jack kicked the gun away at the last second. The shot went wild, shattering a window. He rolled to his feet, breathing hard. Kane adjusted his stance, calm as ever. You should have stayed out of this, Carter, Kane said coolly. Jack spat blood. Yeah? You should have retired. Kane smirked. Not my style. Then he charged. Cypher's gamble. Cypher was hyperventilating. His hands shook as he fumbled with his laptop. There has to be something. Come on. Come on. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was locked out of the directorate system, but he had one trick left. He tapped into the power grid. A risky move. If he hacked it correctly, he could kill the cabin's lights, giving them a fighting chance. If he messed up, they were dead. Cypher took a deep breath. Then he hit enter. Blackout. The entire cabin went dark. Total silence. Jack knew what Cypher had done, and he used it. He moved. Blind but trained. He lunged at Kane in the darkness. Kane fired. A bullet whizzing past Jack's head. Jack tackled him hard, sending them both crashing into the wall. The gun clattered away. Jack went for Kane's throat. Kane twisted free. Another punch Jack barely dodged. Then Evie screamed. Jack turned. A second shadow moved in the darkness. Another agent. They had backup. Evie's instincts take over. Evie's heart pounded. Her hands shook. She saw the second agent reach for her. Something inside her snapped. Move. Before she even thought, her body reacted. She grabbed a rusty screwdriver from the floor and stabbed. The agent choked, stumbling back, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Evie was shocked. She had never done anything like that before, but it felt natural, like she'd done it before. The escape. The backup agent was still recovering. Kane was still locked in a brutal fight with Jack. Cypher shouted, "We need to go!" Jack saw their chance. He delivered a final, brutal kick to Kane's ribs, buying them a few seconds. Then he grabbed Evie's hand. Run! Cypher was already at the back door, laptop under his arm. They bolted. Through the trees. Through the dark. The cabin erupted in gunfire behind them. Jack didn't look back. They weren't safe yet, but they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, they still had a chance. The final revelation. As they ran, Cypher gasped, I saw something before I cut the power. Jack glanced at him. What? Cypher's eyes were wild. The barcode on Evie's hand? Jack nodded. What about it? Cypher swallowed. It's not just an experiment number. Jack frowned. Then what? Cypher hesitated. Then he said the words that changed everything. It's a kill switch. Jack stopped cold. Evie's eyes widened in horror. And far behind them, in the wreckage of the cabin, Kane slowly stood up. Watching. Waiting. Because he knew something they didn't. The hunt was far from over.